Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, and we got a great show for you today. A great show from the newly redesigned studio here in El Cajon, California. Second hour, Mark Brumley will be here with us, and we'll do open forum. You can ask Mark anything you want. This hour, we're going to talk about end-of-life issues, something we probably should talk about a bit more. In part because we all need to consider these things, but also in part because as a society, we need to be considering these things. We're making some bad choices, frankly. And so we'll talk about all of that. You're welcome to call 888-318-7884, whether you have a more society-wide question or a specific question about end-of-life planning and end-of-life policy and all of that. 888-318-7884. Our guest this hour is attorney Jason Negri, who serves as assistant director of the Patients' Rights Council. That's in Steubenville, Ohio. The Patients' Rights Council is committed to the principle that you have the right to know all the facts about the critical issues of life, death, and assisted suicide. It offers understanding and practical support for those facing those critical situations, either themselves or a loved one, and provides what we might call a rational public view and factual information about suicide, euthanasia, all the end-of-life things. As I said, attorney Jason Negri, yes. That's also related here because you are an estate attorney.
Yes, that's true. In Michigan only, but yeah, I'm an estate planning attorney.
Well, thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Does it look bleak out there, the way society is going as far as end-of-life issues?
It looks about as bleak as it has looked for the past 15 years, to be honest.
Yeah.
The forces who are in favor of legalizing doctor-prescribed suicide, they really have done a full court press for the past 20-somewhat years,
right?
In trying to make it legal. And they try in about 20 to 25 states every single year. Sometimes they persuade a state, whether it's the legislature or a public referendum. Sometimes they win. Often they lose. They've got about 9 or so states right now.
But they never quit. They just come back again and again and again.
They never
do.
And
they do have the benefit of a very simple argument. If I wanna, I should be allowed to.
Which, unfortunately, is particularly appealing in modern America.
Yeah,
right?
Right.
It all has to do with autonomy and your rights and everything about you.
And so you're left with the Patients' Rights Council and with all the work that you do educating the public on this, with a lot of explaining to do. In other words, about why this is bad public policy, right. and not just bad public policy, but is bad for the person who's put in the position of having to choose about euthanasia and suicide.
It is. That's true. And you're right when you articulate it that way too, because our position is not it's not as much of a soundbite, if you will, as the
right.
other side is.
Yeah.
It does require somewhat more explanation and digging into why our position is actually the more compassionate one, which is, the other side tries to claim all this high ground about being the compassionate solution for people who are suffering. But when you really dig down to the facts that are at stake and the issues that they're bringing up, it's not as easily understood. But these things have to be taken on head on.
888-318-7884 is our number. Jason Negri, our guest from the Patients' Rights Council. If you have questions about end-of-life issues, perfect hour for you. 888-318-7884. Anyone can call. You don't have to agree with us. You don't have to be a Christian, a Catholic. You just call if you got a question or you want to engage in some conversation about it. 888-318-7884. It just seems to me that I expect, unless something catastrophic happens, that as I approach my death, I will become increasingly vulnerable. And so if there's actual pressure about how expensive my death is, or my end of life care is, if you want to put it in a nice way, and all that there might be those who would exert pressure to find an easy exit.
That pressure is very real, and it's something that most people don't think much about until they get to that point in their own lives, or if they've got a loved one who's approaching, the twilight years themselves. The pressure is real to just, quietly get out of the way. In my own practice, meeting with clients who come in, they talk about doing their will and their powers of attorney, and in the context of those conversations, of course, we do talk about the medical power of attorney, end-of-life medical care, what sort of care they do and don't want, and a fair number of them, they may not actually use the phrase, but their attitude is, I don't want to be a burden.
Yeah,
right. And
right.
It's a commonly understood idea. It's a great concept in rugged autonomous America, where we've since 1787 we've been making our own way as individuals.
Yeah.
And if you can't be a quote productive member of society, there's definitely a corollary to that that you don't belong here, or you are much more expendable and ought to just get out of the way. It's a very hard concept, particularly for Americans, to get away from. But that idea of being a burden, it's hard to fight against, but it's sinister.
It's that rugged individualism that we applaud ourselves for, but it has its limits because,
Right.
and I imagine we can talk too about folks who have disabilities and the pressure that they face.
Absolutely.
But the truth is, as a friend of mine who had disabilities said, almost everybody has disabilities at some time.
In some regard, at some point, yes, we do.
Right. So we all are part of the disabled community at some time.
Right, but many of us don't, to use a common term, we don't identify as such nowadays.
Right.
But if you have friends who have disabilities or people who are involved in the disability rights community, they are very, very well aware of this pressure. The proponents of doctor-assisted suicide, generally speaking, are the white, worried, wealthy, and well. Right? They don't know what it's like to not have the medical care that they want. To them, it is something to be chosen or to just be rejected if they're sick of life, so to speak.
Right.
But you talk to anybody in the minority communities or the disability rights community, they know firsthand what it's like to be marginalized and to not get the care that they want and need. They're scared to death of this, and rightly so. The more this mentality takes hold in society, the harder it is for people who want and desperately want that care and that inclusion. It's going to be harder for them to get it because the expectation for everybody is going to increasingly be just take your pills, get out of the way.
Well, it's really striking to hear you say white because we know it's an absolute fact that African American children are victims of abortion at a much higher rate, and that those who want to engage in abortion position themselves to be ready to take Black lives. I hadn't thought about that, but the same mentality could easily apply to the end of life as well if we don't want to pay for care.
Yeah, I suppose it does. In our work, we tend not to really focus on the issues of abortion as much at all because there's a lot of other good groups and people doing that. Nobody really is doing what we're doing in terms of the specific and select focus on the end-of-life issues on a national perspective and keeping tabs on the changing laws in the states, the publishing and the speaking that we do. So I'm not gainsaying what you're saying. It's true, but people in those communities will tell you firsthand how hard it is to get their concerns listened to. It's become common parlance right now to talk about what do they call it, white privilege.
Yeah.
Well, this is a concrete example of white privilege.
All these choices at the end of life.
Yes, exactly.
Right, just like you had throughout life.
Right.
888-318-7884, 888-318-7884, our number. Attorney Jason Negri is our guest from the Patients' Rights Council. What else should we know about what's going on right now as far as end-of-life issues?
Well, just as you mentioned before, they're the other side, if you will. They've been aggressively promoting their position and trying to expand what they call end-of-life choices, under this innocuous sounding term, whether they call it self-deliverance or aid in dying or something. It plays right into that American mentality of self. So one of the important things to realize is almost always when they're talking about this and trying to get an initiative passed in a particular state, they will very often make reference to the state of Oregon, which was the first state to legalize doctor-prescribed suicide way back when. And there are annual reports by the health department of Oregon regarding people who take advantage of this and who request these lethal doses of medication to end their lives. Many, many times when their spokespeople come up and talk about this, they'll point to Oregon and say, there have been no problems there. The statistics in Oregon suggest that there are no problems and this can be done safely. Well, first of all, what you're talking about itself is
not very safe.
It's not very
Suicide,
safe.
yeah.
Right, but even if you're not going to talk about that point, it really would help people to understand that the example of Oregon is not a good one because those statistics, such as they are all self-reported. There's no enforcement mechanism in Oregon regarding their End-of-Life Act. There needs to be a request made to the doctor, two oral requests and a written request. But when the prescription is finally written and given to the patient, nobody is required to be present when they actually take it. And that's really where the rubber hits the road, is when and if they get to that point where they're feeling very low, that might be when somebody would take the prescription. But the fact is they've got it and nobody is going to be there to see what happens. Are there bad side effects? Well, we know when people take a drug in this amount, in this dosage that's required to kill them, the side effects are well known. You're talking about, burning of the mouth and throat, vomiting, nausea, seizures, things of that sort.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to report it because a doctor's not required to be there. And when a doctor is present and does report it, that doctor is already compromised. We know which side they're on.
Right, because they're already
They have
involved
they have a vested interest in,
Right.
in maintaining the status quo of legalization
Right.
because that's where they are.
Yeah.
And if they start reporting all of these negative side effects and things that happen, well, we know there's going to be some questions asked that are uncomfortable.
Right.
It's kind of like when various states are experiencing budget deficits, and they decide that we're going to save a little bit of money and we're not going to have the highway patrol enforce speeding anymore.
Yeah.
Instead, when you get to your destination after traveling on Highway 5, why don't you just give us a call?
Self-report.
Right. Call in this 1-800 number.
Yeah.
Let us know if you were speeding,
Right.
if you imbibed any adult beverages, if you were texting while you were driving, and we'll assign the proper fine. Who do you think is going to call in a situation like that?
Right.
It's analogous to the situation in Oregon.
Sure.
Nobody's going to call and talk about the problems they experienced.
Right. Maybe we could get bank robbers to report bank robbers.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, yeah. 888-318-7884, our number. Jason Negri is our guest. We're talking about end-of-life issues. We'd love to have a conversation with you if you'd like conversation, or if you have questions. Jason is the exact guy to ask those questions, so you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Take a quick break. Be right back with calls for Jason Negri on end-of-life issues.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Wings is the weekly newsletter that's packed with program info, features, and updates of all that's going on at the Global Catholic Network. Just go to EWTN.com/wings. Fill out your name and email address, and you'll start getting your wings every week. When you get yours, send it to all your friends, and they can send it to their friends. And pretty soon, we're covering the whole world with the good news about EWTN. Wings, the weekly newsletter from EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jason Negri, our guest. Our number, 888-318-7884, and we're talking about end-of-life issues. Before we go to the phones, if you got somebody in your life that needs an introduction to Jesus, maybe they never got an introduction to Jesus, or maybe it missed them when it came. That's what my new book is for. A Teacher of Strange Things, Who Jesus Was, What He Taught, and Why People Still Follow Him. Meant to be a book that you can put in another person's hand and start that conversation about the person of Jesus. You can get it on sale right now at shop.catholic.com. As a matter of fact, 25% off at shop.catholic.com. You just put in the promo code TEACHME and you get that 25% off. And big news, it's in digital format today. I saw it on both Amazon and our own website. So if you go, for example, you want the digital copy, you can get it at 25% off. Or you can get the print copy at 25% off at shop.catholic.com. Either way, use the promo code TEACHME and get your savings. 888-318-7884, our number. We're talking end-of-life issues with Jason Negri. Jason, shall we go to the phones?
Sure, sounds good.
All right, let's go to Dallas, Texas. Chris in Dallas, Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio, KATH 910 AM. Chris, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jason Negri.
Thank you, gentlemen. This is actually a situation that happened to me about 9 years ago, and I'm kind of looking for a little moral direction in this. My father had a heart attack and ended up in the hospital, developed sepsis, and he eventually passed away from this. And under the circumstances, we had to make the decision of whether or not to continue with the respirator and all the other machinery that was involved. And my mother was unable to make a decision in the matter when the doctors told us that there was nothing more they could do. And it's something that's bothered me ever since, and I don't know. I wasn't Catholic at the time. I have entered the church since then, and it's one of those things that's always bugged me. I'm like, okay, is this something that should weigh on me beyond the simple, this is a regrettable situation, or is it one of those circumstances where, no, it was still a reasonably moral choice to disconnect the machine?
Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, that's a great question. People ask it in the abstract quite often. You, having actually gone through it, would obviously be concerned about this. really what you have to look at, and I can't know the specific details other than what you shared, in your question. There are principles here regarding removing what might be deemed burdensome medical care, right? And there actually is a moral calculus that the bishops give to us that is consistent with church teaching in this area, where you have to assess the burden of the treatment and how that stacks up against the expected benefit to the patient. And you can apply this to any type of situation. In the situation you're talking about, if the person is in fact in a vegetative state and doesn't have any reasonable hope of recovery at all, which it sounds like that was the case with your dad, that's a medical opinion, not an ethical one. But based upon the medical factors, if that is the case, and if a machine is in fact doing his breathing for him, he has lost the ability to breathe on his own, right? So that biological function is not applicable, and a machine is artificially doing his breathing for him and literally keeping him alive, then again, based on what you have told me, it does seem like it is a moral decision to be able to remove that respirator and allow the person to pass away naturally. It's not affirmatively causing their death the way, for example, removing food and water would be, because that's a normative type of treatment, not a medical one. But if the body has lost the ability to breathe and a machine is artificially doing that, then yes, it is considered morally legitimate in most cases to remove that respirator and allow death to take place naturally.
Does that help you, Chris?
It does. It actually helps me quite a bit. It's been, almost a decade it's been bugging me, and I really appreciate your answer. It was very helpful and very clear.
Sure.
Thank you, Chris. I'm glad Chris started us with that question. I'm very grateful for the question, Chris, but because many Catholics that I have met, some quite well educated, think that the Catholic Church teaches that you have to do everything to keep a person alive. And they mean that sincerely.
I've encountered that a few times.
And that is
true.
not at all what the Church teaches.
No, it's not.
Yeah, so you got, and then people end up, even a priest might tell them it's time to let go, and the priest is acting in good faith, but they won't believe it because they believe that the Church's teaching is never let go. Just fight for every breath.
Right. Yeah, and that's a misnomer, and I think in some cases it does heap up unnecessary burdens and put them on people that don't need to be there. It's unfortunate, but that is a misconception.
888-318-7884, our number. We're talking about end-of-life issues with Jason Negri, who is himself an attorney who deals with end-of-life issues in the state of Michigan and the assistant director of the Patients' Rights Council. I got it right, yes?
You did.
Okay, good. Let's go to Shania in Nebraska, listening on Spirit
Go
Catholic
Huskers.
Radio. Shania, all right, you got your Go Huskers in there. Are you there with us, Shania?
Yep.
All right, go ahead.
My question is how do people think that morally, if you can tell that someone is spiritually aware of everything around them, or if you hold, I guess, I don't know. I'm trying to put this into words.
Okay,
it's very hard.
let me just ask you this, Shania. Is the question related to suicide and euthanasia? Okay. And so you're saying
legalizing it?
Right.
Okay, so how can, for example, someone, if someone else is in their right mind and they choose that, how can we say no, they should not be allowed to do that? That's where we're going, Shania, but I'm not sure.
No, I'm just, my question is more so how does our government think that, how do people think that even if someone's in their right mind, that they would be able to
choose suicide?
To actually
go
do that.
for it? Yeah.
Right, and this obviously is something that's very close to you, Shania. Hang on, I'm going to come back to you, but let's let Jason take a shot at an answer to the question of why folks think that a government should allow people to choose suicide.
Well, there's actually a fundamental difference between the way state laws treat suicide itself versus assisting a suicide.
Okay.
And it does go to the mental state of the patient, of the person involved. There are actually no state laws prohibiting suicide itself.
Well, they're not.
Out of recognition of the fact that the people who choose this are in some sort of in some sort of extreme state of mind where they're feeling desperate, and despairing, and we don't want to create an additional burden on them if, God forbid, they were to try to commit suicide
and
and
then,
fail,
then try them for attempted
and
murder
then
or
try them
something.
for attempted suicide,
Yeah, I
which is
see.
always a corollary to the state. So those
Right.
laws. There used to be laws on the books prohibiting suicide, and we realized that it was kind of counterproductive. It didn't really help
Yeah.
the people the way
That's
it was
not what
supposed
people
to.
need.
But that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about assisting a suicide. You've got an objective third party whose judgment supposedly is clear, trying to help somebody in this act of desperation.
Yeah.
And that's what is on the books as criminal in every state. Even though a few states have since legalized doctor-assisted suicide, they make an exception if it's a doctor and meets certain criteria. But it still fundamentally is, you're talking about somebody who is assisting somebody else to kill themselves. And that's what's generally speaking prohibited.
Shania, are you? What do you think? You all right?
I think, yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
I think, how could you can't really undo what's already been done, obviously. So if someone had carried out with it and it was done, there would be nothing more that you can do. But I guess, in my personal opinion, helping is not to assist somebody carrying out suicide. Helping someone, I guess, would be helping someone that's suicidal to kind of lead them into a different direction, that there's more
God
more
bless you.
ways out.
Right.
You have more options to be alive than you do to be dead.
Oh, that's so beautifully said, Shania.
Which is why there are suicide hotlines, and we rightly look upon it as a crisis situation
Right.
that people should be intervening and helping with. Helping somebody commit suicide is not the answer. It's such a cognitive dissonance with the way we treat suicide in general, to try to think that assisted suicide is somehow this benighted, compassionate option when you look at how we ought to be treating people who are suicidal to begin with.
And Shania, thank you so much for your question and for taking the time. I really appreciate your call. It seems to me that a society-wide message that we want you to live, to people who are suffering suicidal thoughts, suicidal depressions and whatnot, is compromised. Like if we speak out of the other side of our mouth with somebody else in another situation, we don't really oppose suicide anymore. We're not against it anymore.
Right. I mean, we recognize it for what it is. It's not an action to be condemned. It's a plea for help for somebody who needs assistance.
Okay. Shania, thanks very much for your call. Our number is 888-318-7884. What about doctors? Do you have any concern as a practical matter if suicide, for example, becomes commonplace, the assisted suicide, I mean,
Right.
Physician-assisted suicide. I mean, we always had heard, and I realize you're not an abortion advocate, but this is just as a parallel. For years and years, we had heard, well, if you don't want an abortion, don't choose one. But now we see Catholic hospitals being attacked, and they're being told that they could lose their funding if they don't provide abortions and all that. So obviously, if you don't want one, don't get one isn't real.
No.
And so when people say, well, if you don't want to participate in suicide, don't. But what will happen to doctors? Will they face governmental pressure to participate in this?
Unfortunately, they very likely will. If you look just north to us, to Canada, they had a sweeping nationwide law legalizing both assisted suicide and euthanasia back in, I think it was 2015, 2016. Immediately, you saw some Canadian periodicals, news articles, magazines calling for doctors to be required to participate in their patients' suicides because they looked upon assisted suicide and euthanasia as a right.
Yeah.
And as soon as something is deemed a right, you
got it.
cannot deny it to
Yeah.
them. So, and within 2 years, it wasn't just newspapers calling for it. It was actually the Supreme Court of Canada determined that doctors do not have the right to not participate. If they're not going to do it themselves, they must make a referral to a colleague who will. And to some doctors, that constitutes participation in
Sure.
the act. They want nothing to do with it.
Right.
It can't be that way in Canada anymore. And it's coming to America in a slightly different format. It's already the case for other healthcare practitioners.
Yeah, like a pharmacist, for example.
Exactly. That's exactly the example. Doctors, for now, in Oregon, have a safe harbor provision, and they have a conscience clause, and they don't have to participate. Pharmacists do not have that right. If you're a pharmacist and a doctor writes a prescription for a lethal overdose, you have to fulfill it.
And that's horrifying.
It is.
You can't do your job then. I mean, but basically they're saying to certain people of conscience, this is not a job for you because you're going to have to say no, and then you're out of a job.
Yep, and it's marginalizing people of conscience and people of religious sensibilities who don't want to be participating in this.
Right.
But that's the wave of it. What starts as an option for some people, which is exactly how they get it in the door, will rapidly become an expectation for everyone, for both the medically vulnerable who are going to be swept along in this,
Right.
and for the doctors who don't want to but might be forced to participate.
We got lots of folks on the line. Hang on the line, folks. We're going to get to your calls when we come back. Attorney Jason Negri, an end-of-life attorney in the state of Michigan and the assistant director of the Patients' Rights Council, is here with us to take your calls. 888-318-7884.
Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
If you spend any time on Twitter, Facebook, or mainstream media, you're probably familiar with the litany of slogans that skeptics employ to rescue you from the foolish belief that God exists. The constant onslaught seems to leave people with the idea that they have no alternative but to embrace atheism. How can a Christian respond? In One Less God Than You, John DeRosa breaks down 20 of the most common atheist challenges and shows you how to craft effective answers. Atheism is more aggressive and widespread than ever. Read One Less God Than You and prepare yourself to respond with the joyful truth that God is real. To get your copy of One Less God Than You, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Tomorrow on More to Life, decluttering.
Is your life cluttered up with problems you're tired of dealing with? We're going to help you clean house.
That's tomorrow on More to Life. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Second hour, Mark Brumley will be here, and we're going to do open forum. Any question you got, welcome during open forum. This hour, Jason Negri is with us, and he emphasizes to me, not a theologian, not someone to speak on behalf of the church, but rather an attorney, a Catholic, end-of-life attorney, familiar with these topics, and also very able to speak on behalf of the Patients' Rights Council, where he is
Associate Director.
I knew that. I knew it was Associate Director. Back to the phones then. We'll go. Bethany in Binghamton, New York, listening on the Station of the Cross. Glad to have you with us, Bethany. Go ahead with your question for Jason Negri.
Hi. So I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I work in a nursing home, and I deal with a lot of people who have swallowing impairments. So sometimes I have to make a really hard decision about whether it's safe or not for someone to consume food orally. And my question is it considered morally wrong if I'm making a decision where someone really I'm recommending that they cannot have something orally, and usually in these cases it leads, obviously it leads to their body weakening further at the end of their lives. And that's just my question. Is it morally wrong for me to be making that decision?
Well, your question is partially, I think, a moral one. Partially, it's a medical judgment. The criteria that you're speaking about by which you have to make this decision seems sound to me, that you have to make a determination if somebody's risk of choking or aspiration outweighs their ability to continue to consume food orally. And we both know that there are alternative means of introducing food and nutrition to the body. There's different types of tubes, J-tube, G-tube, those are primary examples of that. So based upon what you're telling me, no, I don't think it's immoral for you to make that determination that they shouldn't eat by mouth anymore. Just, however, being aware that in doing so, they are very likely going to be relying on tube feeding, which in far too many circles is deemed to be what we talked about earlier. Too many places deem tube feeding to be extraordinary medical treatment, which could be removed if the patient isn't, quote, getting any better. That is the moral problem that I have with the situation, not with your initial determination that a patient probably shouldn't be eating by mouth anymore because there's a heightened risk of choking, but rather realizing that the alternative is for them to be receiving nutrition and hydration by way of a tube, and that very factor, unfortunately, makes a lot of people think that it is automatically artificial medical treatment, which can therefore be removed, and that's not the case.
Bethany, what do you think?
Yeah, no, that's great. I definitely do have a lot of conversations about PEG tubes and J tubes and things like that. And I didn't really think of it on that side of things, so I appreciate you giving me that answer.
Yeah, thanks for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bethany. Thanks very much. We'll go now to Robert in Texas, listening on EWTN Channel 130, Sirius XM Satellite Radio. Robert, thanks so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jason Negri.
Hey, everybody. First off, God bless all of your listeners. They seem to be carrying their cross as well. I'm also an attorney in Texas, and what I was going to say is I don't know if Jason's a member of the Catholic Lawyers Guild, but it's always good if we can band together as learned counsel to fight against this fight. I'm in a different area of law, but thanks to him, I might be looking at a career change. The other thing I was going to say is that there are what we call here in Texas, I can't speak outside of Texas, but at least here in Texas, we have what's called directed-to physicians, and they also call them living wills that are specifically written to conform with the doctrine of the Catholic Church. So they're written, and they're I don't know if is that your right, counsel? Your name is Jason, I think.
Well, they call them different things in different states, but the concept of a living will is kind of the generic term. So yeah, so well, I'm familiar with living wills as such.
Well, what about?
Cool, awesome. Well, I mean, I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to follow up with the question on the. What'd you call it? The Catholic Lawyers Guild?
Yes.
Catholic Lawyers Guild. Yeah.
Okay.
It's an organization of Catholic attorneys, and it's there are chapters here and there and everywhere, and some of them are very active, some of them are not. But any attorneys out there that might be listening, try to find it, and if you can't find it, start one. You know, because it's very important that we can use our talents for the grace of God, and try to band together and try to be a voice for the kingdom.
Right. Well, Robert, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate your call, and for that, you'd agree the Catholic Lawyers Guild. He's not like making me advertise something that's.
No, they're sound.
Okay. Oh man, I don't know, because I don't know the Catholic Lawyers Guild.
No, you're safe. They're a good group.
Okay, right. I don't know what they do at their meetings. Robert, thank you very, very much. We're talking about end-of-life issues. Attorney Jason Negri here with us, the Associate Director of the Patients' Rights Council. You can find them online. Just type in Patients' Rights Council, and you can find their materials online. And if you'd like to talk with Jason Negri, give us a call, 888-318-7884. Going to Ohio now. Mary in Canton, Ohio. Listening on Living Bread Radio. You are next, Mary. Thank you so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jason Negri.
Yes, good evening. My question pertains to the advanced medical directives from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. I was questioning if you needed to have another document, such as I'm here in Ohio. Is it important to have the Ohio Living Will, or will the bioethics advanced medical directive stand? I was told that it wouldn't stand if you were in hospice or if you're in the ER or, intensive care. And I thought that the person who told me this was rather knowledgeable. So I was just delighted that I could voice that to you.
Well, Mary, let me just ask you this before we get an answer from Jason. But do you want this? You want either the directive or a living will because you want to make sure that the treatment that you receive at the end of your life is consistent with what the church teaches about the end of life?
Exactly. Now,
okay.
I already have the NCBC form.
Okay.
And they were saying that was not going to stand up in the hospital, etc.
Okay.
I needed to have something that was the Ohio legal living will or advanced medical directives.
All right. Well, let's hear from the lawyer.
Yeah. Thanks for your question, Mary. Actually, I'm going to recommend a better option for you. First of all, I would say do not get a living will. Living wills are fraught with danger because even though you think you're writing down what you want, the person who's going to be interpreting the language of that living will may or may not be on the same page with you philosophically, morally, spiritually, and they might decide to interpret it a little bit differently than you want it to be interpreted. The previous caller's questioning regarding swallowing and tube feeding is a perfect example. You might say something along the lines of, I don't want any extraordinary medical treatment to sustain my life. But a well-meaning but erroneous doctor or nurse could look at that and say, well, that includes tube feeding, so we're just going to remove tube feeding because that's extraneous and extraordinary treatment. So I would say do not do a living will. I can't speak to the contents of the NCBC's document. There are many good organizations out there that have their own documents. I don't know whether they specify it according to each state's laws, and that might be the shortcoming that somebody's talking about. But I will recommend that you look into our document. The Patients' Rights Council has an advance directive, which is a durable power of attorney for healthcare, and it identifies a trusted decision maker who can make those decisions for you in the event you become unable to make those decisions for yourself. And I know that our document, we do actually do the research and make sure that we have one that complies with the laws in every single state. And the Patients' Rights Council, of course, is based in Ohio, so you know that one's going to be good. But yes, I strongly recommend you contact the Patients' Rights Council and ask for what we call our PMDD, our Protective Medical Decisions document, and ask for the one from Ohio.
Does that help you, Mary?
Oh, that's outstanding. Thank you so very much.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you. Kind of nice talking to Mary.
Yeah.
I hope she calls back sometime. I should have asked her what her favorite topics are. We could plan more shows like that, and then Mary will call back. We got to take a quick break. Right back with more with Jason Negri on end-of-life issues.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
She was a mystic and reformer who died at the age of 33.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. Catherine of Siena accomplished something no one thought possible. She convinced Pope Gregory XI to return to Rome after the popes had lived in France for almost the whole of the 14th century. They've been there ever since.
For more about the Doctors of the Church, visit doctorsofthechurch.com.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, and our guest is Jason Negri, end-of-life attorney in the state of Michigan and also associate director of the Patients' Rights Council. I said you can go on the internet and find the Patients' Rights Council by just putting in the words Patients' Rights Council, but you all have that old-fashioned thing called a phone number, too.
We do. You can actually reach us on a landline, believe it or not. The number for the Patients' Rights Council is 800-958-5678.
800-958-5678.
5678.
78. I always say it twice. I don't know why.
And of course, online, it's just patientsrightscouncil.org. Pretty simple.
And an actual human being answers that phone?
Yes, believe it or not, Nancy will take your call.
What century is it in Ohio? Caitlin in Rochester, New York, listening on the Station of the Cross. You are next. Thank you for your call. Caitlin, go ahead with your question for Jason Negri.
Hi. So I actually have a Catholic living will. It was actually written and I guess prepared in another state, but I presume it would still be somewhat legally binding in the state of New York. My question is that right now we're in the age of COVID, and I live in a state where it's been particularly restrictive.
Yes, you do.
And it's not always the case that you can have someone come into the hospital with you. So if I were unconscious in a car accident or an emergency, how can I be sure that my hospital or my provider is aware of this document, and how do I make sure that they follow it?
That is a fantastic question, and unfortunately, still being in the age of COVID, questions like this are still being worked out in real time. I would like to say that there is a surefire way that you can make sure that your providers are aware of and follow your advance directive, but there's no real way to be sure, especially if it depends on the nature of the advance directive you have. You're characterizing it as a Catholic living will. Well, if it's a living will, that means that it's not identifying a trusted decision maker. It's actually purporting to put forth in the document itself the care you do or don't want. There's no accountability. There's nobody else looking to make sure that the doctors and nurses are reading it and interpreting it properly. So I would stay away from the living will for that reason alone, and rather get the other type of advance directive, which is what we provide, which is the durable power of attorney for health care. It's identifying a person who can assess the totality of the circumstances and make the decision that you want them to make. That's what would be preferable. But again, in the age of COVID, if your decision maker is not permitted to be in the hospital, that's creating problems for the hospital left and right. What about people who don't have living wills, right? They have a family member who, under state law in New York might have to step up and make those decisions, or if they actually have a power of attorney for healthcare, then that named person is going to have the authority to do that. But if the hospital isn't allowing that person to come in and participate in the conversations, that's a big problem. Unfortunately, I think those are the sorts of problems that are going to be hashed out after the fact by lawsuit.
Yeah. I wonder, too, if it might be a good idea to somehow make my primary care physician aware of it, hoping that maybe someone would contact them for healthcare information. But
hopefully, if your medical records
like you said,
indicate who that is,
feeling...
that might be helpful, yeah.
Yeah, that's the only thing I could think of, because I had the same thought. It'll be figured out 2 years from now when there's a lot of damage done.
Right.
Yep. Caitlin, I'm going to say thanks. Keep moving. Lots of folks on the line to ask about end-of-life issues, which makes me think we should do this more often. Thanks very much for the call. Here to help us working through these end-of-life issues in a Catholic way, the Associate Director of the Patients' Rights Council and himself an end-of-life attorney in the state of Michigan, Jason Negri. Up next, Teresa in Florida, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM satellite radio. Teresa, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jason Negri.
Well, I'm in Florida, but I have a brother, and I am his DPOA. So part of my question was answered, but I had to make the decision to give him a feeding tube. But his daughter, my brother made me his DPO, but the daughter is always saying, well, she's next of kin. So I don't know if there's any way like she could take me to court and have that overturned.
That's a great question. My answer to you is that this is America, and unfortunately people can sue for anything they want, which is problematic and indicative of some of the problems in our society. However, if there were no power of attorney document, then your brother's daughter would probably have priority over you in the statutes to make his decisions for him. But because he has executed a proper durable power of attorney naming you his decision maker, you have priority over her. So she might be able to make trouble for you, but the only way I presume that she would be successful in doing so is if she can persuade the judge that you have somehow been derelict in your duty, you have made an affirmatively bad decision that objectively is bad for him and his care, and I cannot conceivably say that putting him on a feeding tube under normative conditions would qualify for that. So while she might be able to try to make trouble for you, I think your legal standing is probably pretty sound.
very good. Yes, people were very confused that I was the DPOA because she would have never. It's everything is the quality of life. You know, they let me just tell you, they were against it, but guess what? They gave him that feeding tube. He gained 40 pounds. I paid private for him to have speech, and believe it or not, he started chewing and swallowing on his own.
Fantastic.
And the speech therapist could not believe it because she didn't want to do it.
Teresa, it's a wonderful story, and I'm guessing your brother had some insight into what would happen, and that's why you were made
very probably
the durable power of attorney. Jason Negri is our guest. You're welcome to call with your end-of-life questions, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Thanks again, Teresa, for the call. I'm going to head to Minnesota now. Eric in Minnesota, also listening to EWTN on Channel 130 on Sirius XM satellite radio. Eric, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jason Negri.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for taking the call. I was just listening earlier and I was a little bit unclear on the examples. So the first one I heard was that if someone's on a respirator and no chance of getting better, it would be no issue to remove that and then they would die. But then the later example was the G-tube, and that if you remove that, they would die. That would not be okay to do. And I was unclear about the difference, if that makes sense.
Yep, that's actually a very insightful question. The difference has to do with what the patient's body is capable of doing. If you have a patient on a respirator, ostensibly the body has lost the ability to breathe on its own. The respirator is actually carrying out the essential functionality that the body ordinarily should be able to do. Whereas with a G-tube, it's simply introducing the food and water that the body is processing properly. If the body is able to continue to process food and water, then simply providing it by means of a G-tube is not extraordinary. The patient may need a little bit of extra assistance, just like some patients might need help in carrying the food to their mouths. But that's a normative type of situation. And if you've ever had the privilege of being with somebody who's going through the dying process, you would know that the body does start to shut down, the organs no longer work, and once that happens, once the organs are no longer working and the body is no longer properly processing food and water, it's perfectly legitimate to remove food and water at that point. I've actually had discussions and debates with priests who don't understand this, who think that it's morally obligatory to always provide food and water all the way to the bitter end, and that is absolutely not the case. It can be very uncomfortable for the patient, causing actual pain if you're trying to introduce food and water to somebody whose stomach is not digesting anymore.
And then I believe in some cases you can drown them because their lungs will fill with fluid. So, Eric, does that help you? It's the condition of the patient in handling these treatments that is dispositive.
Yeah, I think I get that theory. I can see where it would be sometimes hard to find that line in real life. But
Eric, what you just said, I just want to stop there on what you just said. That is why very, very few ethicists or end-of-life experts will give blanket answers all the time, do this or don't do that, because there aren't easy answers in many, many cases. And I know that produces anxiety in people, but it's something that as mature Catholics we have to understand. There are very clear, bright line ethical and moral lines that we don't cross, but knowing when we're crossing those lines and when we're not can, in many cases, be difficult, and it takes discernment and often help.
Right. Yeah, the principles are there. How the principles are carried out, given the practicalities of the situation you find yourself in, that could change.
Okay, Eric?
Yep, I hope I never have to do it, but thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Lord does provide help too, and I do think I have to also remember the Lord is kind and merciful. He's not going, well, you got that detail wrong, or that you are obligated to follow basic morals in your treatment of every human being. But if you got something a little bit wrong,
right.
I mean,
he's not standing over you with a stick saying,
you
should have called Jason at 12 o'clock at night to make sure.
Yeah, or you should have given that 20 more minutes. You did the best you could in the situation. So we don't want to put heavy burdens on people, but we do have to be adults about this, and it does require reasoning through things in many cases. It requires reasoning through, and sometimes you need the help of a priest or the National Catholic Bioethics Center or the Patients' Rights Council. That's what they're there for. And it's funny because even at the Vatican, you'll notice some medical issues will take years to resolve.
Absolutely.
They'll work and work and work, try and debate and work. So we understand that.
Yeah, these things develop over time. As
Yeah.
new medical technologies come down the pipe, we have to deal with what they imply.
Yeah. Jenna in Iowa, listening on 88.1 FM in Iowa. You are next. Go ahead with your question for Jason Negri.
I have a question about the ethics of surgery sometimes. I work in cardiac surgery, and occasionally we have very unwell patients who come in for incredibly medically complex procedures. And the surgeons do a whole investigation into what their mortality and morbidity, risk is. And my question is, what are the ethics involved in either choosing to operate and with the knowledge that they're very unlikely to not ever wake up after surgery or have a long, prolonged passing away in an intensive care unit after 6 weeks or 8 weeks,
Right.
versus choosing not to operate and telling them enjoy the rest of your life that you have.
Yeah.
and,
So
and letting them go.
Is there such a thing as overtreatment? Is that a thing?
There is absolutely such a thing as overtreatment. And Jenna, what you're describing may in fact be an example of that. I think that conversation, that all-important conversation, needs to happen with the patient and their family members and their primary care physician and the cardiac surgeon who might be carrying out that procedure before the patient makes the decision. I mentioned earlier that there's a moral calculus to be made regarding the benefit-burden ratio, right? Does the proposed treatment carry with it a benefit that is going to outweigh the potential burden on the patient? And unfortunately, making that decision objectively is compromised by our American approach to death. We do not tend to approach death with maturity. It's going to happen to all of us. And if you really sit down and think about it for a little while, it's the silliest thing in the world that we're not spending enough time really considering the very issue that you're bringing up. When they're polled, 83% of Americans in the most recent poll say that given the choice, they would prefer to die at home surrounded by loved ones. But in actuality, fewer than 40% of Americans actually die at home, and far too many of us die in hospitals or nursing homes hooked up to treatments that had dubious value to begin with. But whether it's because of a coercive insurance companies or a coercive medical establishment, or if doctors are afraid of being sued for not offering every single conceivable treatment, regardless of how little a benefit it might actually offer the patient, there are a multiplicity of reasons why these sorts of situations happen. But you, as somebody who works in cardiac surgery, I don't think you have any moral obligation at that point to engage in or not engage in the surgery. The decision has already been made by the patient, rightly or wrongly.
What do you think, Jenna?
I think that's wonderful. I've talked to the surgeon about this when it happens, and his philosophy is, I'm their only chance. I can't send them off to die without knowing I've tried everything. And sometimes I've said, there's a lot of dignity in a natural death, and we just struggle with it sometimes, and I just pray to God and know that He's leading me to where I need to be. And while I'm in that operating room, I'm just going to keep on providing the absolute best care I can for that patient.
Exactly. I don't know that I would agree with the surgeon's position. I understand it, but
Yeah.
I'm not certain it's a satisfactory answer.
No, it does. It seems even a little bit grandiose, and maybe not in a bad way, maybe in a way that is trying to do what's best.
And I think that's endemic to doctors anyway. I mean, they really do hold a lot of power over life and death in their hands, and maybe they can't get away from that idea that I'm their last chance, and if I don't give this to them,
Right.
they're going to die, at home. Well, okay, they're going to die at home, but objectively speaking, that's what most people want anyway.
Jenna, thanks. A great question to end our hour with Jason Negri on. Thanks very much. Next hour, Mark Brumley will be here, and we'll do open forum. I do want to let you know that next week we have a Focus podcast with our guest today, Jason Negri, on a completely different topic. And I'll invite you to listen to it, because another part of his life is advocacy for victims of sexual abuse. Clergy sexual abuse in particular, and it's called the Daniel Coalition. You can look it. I didn't want to take a chance that I'd get it wrong. The Daniel Coalition. You can look it up. But check out Catholic Answers Focus next week if that is something of interest to you. It's about the laity's interaction with bishops when it comes to these issues, and also how do we advocate for fellow lay folks who have been abused sexually. That'll be on Catholic Answers Focus. Jason Negri, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the hour with you.
Thank you, Si. Me too.
Patients' Rights Council. You can find Jason's work, Patients' Rights Council. Right back. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. He's here. Everybody knows him as the publisher of the president of the most important publishing house in the Alpha Quadrant. Mark Brumley, the president of Ignatius Press here. Open forum. You can call him, ask him anything you want. 888-318-7884. Hello, Mark Brumley.
Hey, how are you doing? The new Catholic Answers, I almost said Ignatius Press, the new Catholic Answers best-selling author.
I'm doing very well. I am the best-selling author of all the radio hosts currently employed here. I am the highest-selling currently employed radio host.
Well, we were just talking about your new book, and tell people the title of your new book.
Oh, no, I couldn't, Mark. All right, A Teacher of Strange Things, Who Jesus Was, What He Taught, and Why People Still Follow Him.
It's better than A Strange Teacher of Things.
That's true. But although some of the things that he does, we would identify as strange because strange in the technical sense that, especially if we had a tendency towards any kind of materialism. Well, it's strange when someone can cast out demons and heal people with a word. That is very strange behavior.
That is. I was telling you before we went on the air that we Ignatius Press are distributing the book as well.
Thank you.
So, but of course, we want people to go to Catholic.com and purchase it there. But if they happen to be at the Ignatius.com site already, that we want them to feel like they can purchase your book from us.
I appreciate you saying that. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't care where they buy it. I just buy it. Buy it early, buy it often, buy lots of copies. Thanks, Mark.
There we go.
Thanks. Usually we start out by talking about an Ignatius Press book, and I hope you will have something you want to tell me about. But thank you for giving me a chance to talk about my contribution.
Well, we have a great companion volume or set of companion volumes. We do the Benedict XVI Jesus of Nazareth books.
Yes.
So
right.
Those are great companion volumes to your book, which is very popular and accessible, but you want to go a little deeper in terms of the teaching and the historical background of Jesus. The Jesus of Nazareth books by Pope Benedict are good. And we just came out with a book by a fellow named Michael Hesseman called Jesus of Nazareth, Archaeologists.
Oh, I love that book.
The title, Retracing the Footsteps of Jesus. So that goes more into the archaeology. So there are a lot of great Jesus books out there, and I am just delighted that you have added to the list.
I feel like somewhere in there you suggested that Pope Benedict was a deeper thinker than I am. I feel like somewhere in there the suggestion was made.
I think you're both deep thinkers.
Oh yeah,
we
are.
Think he had 3 volumes to
That's
cover.
True. Right.
You cover in a single, relatively short, accessible paperback. So.
Right, and then the near presence of the Holy Spirit as well as pontiff of the Roman Church. Not that.
No, and I think he's 93 years old, so he's had a few years to get a head start on you.
Yeah, I love his books, and the funniest title of any of his books, and I know that there's many comic titles, Introduction to Christianity, because you're like, this is the introduction. Like,
that's right.
What's
the deep course?
What's advanced Christianity like?
Yes. If this is 101, what's 401? Or 404 or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. It's funny that you mentioned that book because people will often ask me, where's a good place to start with Ratzinger? And there are a lot of, depending on the people and what their interest is, there are lots of places you can start. I have, from time to time, recommend to start with Introduction to Christianity. It's a challenging book from a certain perspective, but it's immensely worthwhile. I think I may have told the story on Catholic Answers Live, but I know I tell it all the time in other contexts. When I first was seriously exploring Catholicism now, so I'm actually, reading Louis Bouillet's Spirit and Forms of Protestantism, Carl Adam's Spirit of Catholicism, just like serious, so I'm, probably 19 years old when I'm doing this, right? So I get Introduction to Christianity. It wasn't published by Ignatius Press because Ignatius Press was just coming online at that time, but it had been published back in the late 60s. I'm not real clear. I don't remember now who the publisher of that. I remember the actual book cover and all that, but anyway, so I picked up this book. And I kind of had the reaction that you described. As this is the introduction. What am I going to do when it gets deeper? I had no idea what that man was talking about. But then I read other things, and I underwent, a conversion. I became a Catholic, and I won't say that then next time I picked it up, it was easy to understand, but I will say it was profoundly rewarding.
Yes.
The challenges that
right.
It was profoundly rewarding. So
right.
I would encourage, Catholics to read Introduction to Christianity by Joseph Ratzinger.
Yeah.
It's just a great work of 20th century Catholic theology.
I think of it as a great follow-up to A Teacher of Strange Things, who Jesus was, what he taught, and why people still follow him. A great follow-up. There's so many. He's such a generous mind too. I never get over his chapter on belief in God there, and how generous he is to atheists there in saying, well, atheists and Christians have the same problem. We don't know. There's just so much that we don't know. And,
right.
and to be like that, he finds a way to be kind of in solidarity with people you think are our opponents, but no, we're not. We share so much, including an overwhelming amount of ignorance.
Right. Well, there's a great conversation about the nature of belief and the nature of doubt, and belief and versus knowledge. And of course, the atheist, in fact, has a kind of faith. He has a faith that there is no God.
Right.
And so as Ratzinger points out there, he's constantly faced with, quotes, the temptation to believe that there is actually a larger meaning to the universe,
Right.
And of course, the believer in the proper sense, and the Christian committed believer is, of course, tempted to not believe in God or not trust in God and so on. So they are, as you say, kind of in a similar boat.
Right.
But the believer, then this is often the case, and Ratzinger often makes this point, and Chesterton and C.S. Lewis make the point as well, that the believer can account for what the believer does and what the atheist does. The atheist has a problem accounting for the believer, and he has a problem consistently living out his atheism.
Right. Yep.
So
yeah. Introduction to Christianity. Hey, it's open forum. We've already got a bunch of lines full. There's 2 lines open if you want to call with your question for Mark Brumley, the president of Ignatius Press, the most important press in the entire Alpha Quadrant. 888-318-7884. The number. So I'll give you a choice, Mark. We can go to the phones, or we can continue talking about A Teacher of Strange Things.
Why don't, as much as I'd love talking about your book, why don't we go to the phone?
You don't want to talk about me anymore? Okay, fine.
We'll work you in,
We'll work me in. I like that. All right. Mitch, we'll try to make it seem natural. Mitch in Wisconsin, listening on the new and improved Catholic Answers Live app. Glad to have you, Mitch. Go ahead and start us off with your question for Mark Brumley.
Hi. So my question deals with something I noticed in the Roman canon and also in the offertory prayers in the extraordinary form, and that's that it almost seems like there's 2 sacrifices going on. The first one being the offering of the bread and the wine to God. The priest says, we offer you these gifts, these offerings, these holy and unblemished sacrifices. And it almost seems, especially in the extraordinary form, that the bread and the wine themselves are actually being offered in reparation to God. But then after consecration, it seems like then it's the sacrifice of Christ. So I guess I'm wondering, is it all really one sacrifice, or what's sort of going on there? How can it be said that the bread and the wine are in themselves sacrifices?
Good question, and you're touching on a very complicated. You're touching on a simple theological issue that has complicated elements to it. But essentially, there is a sense in which the bread and wine that we bring, we the faithful, and obviously, the faithful at your typical parish aren't, it's not like the bread was baked by my wife and she's bringing it up, or the wine was made by, my cousin Louis out in the vineyard and we're bringing those things up. No, but through the purchase of these resources through the gift of the parishioners in the parish, we have the elements of bread and wine that are offered to God. They are in themselves offerings that we make to God. And what's an offering? When we take from the gifts that we've received from God, some portion of those gifts as representing the whole of what we've received from God. So the bread and wine that we bring to the Eucharistic celebration, these are tokens of the gift of our whole selves. Just the bread and the wine, the elements that become the Eucharistic sacrifice themselves, have this element of offering or gift to God from among all of the many gifts that he gives us. And so what happens? Well, God gives us these gifts. We give back as a token of the totality of his gifts. We give them back. And what does he do? He transforms them into the real gift, the true gift, the gift that makes all other gifts possible, the gift of his Son. He transforms these gifts and makes them truly worthy offerings to give to God. And by doing that, enables us truly to offer ourselves in a worthy way, worthy by virtue of our repentant communion. That's a phrase I'm using more and more. Our repentant communion with the gift that Christ offers. What do I mean by that? Well, we know that none of us is ever really worthy to associate what we do with what Jesus did on the cross 2,000 years ago, and what he continues to do in the Eucharistic sacrifice as the risen, glorified Lord, namely give himself to the Father out of total self-giving love. None of us is worthy to do that. So how do we participate in that in a worthy way? Echoing back to what St. Paul says about a worthy participation in the Eucharist that isn't a profanation of the Eucharist, not a profanation of the body and blood of Christ. The answer is we do it by virtue of repentant faith. When we are repentant and we participate in the Eucharist, then the Eucharistic sacrifice that Christ offers to Father, we become participants in. So yes, there is in a certain way a twofold sacrifice there. There is the gifts that we bring of these earthly elements of bread and wine. It's true that the bread is the work of human hands, and the fruit of the vine, work of human hands, and with respect to the wine, these are we've taken God's gifts and we've fashioned them and made them sort of human things, but we're giving them back to God as acknowledging everything comes from him. But because he's able to transform them, this sacrifice that we make gets elevated into the Trinitarian gift of the Son to the Father by the power of the Spirit, which happened space and time on the cross 2,000 years ago, which is made present under the forms or appearances of bread and wine by the power of Christ acting through the ministerial priest. So all these things are brought together in the Eucharistic sacrifice. So it's very astute of you to see this twofold element there, but really the one sacrifice, the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, is what takes up or brings together all of the things that we bring to the Eucharist and gives them power and meaning and makes them capable of being a Christ-worthy sacrifice to the Father.
Mitch, I hope that's helpful to you. Thank you so much for the question. We got to take a quick break, though, and we'll be right back with more Open Forum with Mark Brumley on Catholic Answers Live.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connection's set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connection's website is homeschoolconnections.com.
When I pray, there should be a change worked in me. Why? Because when I converse with God, I receive a part of God. That's the essence of prayer. But when I pray, I receive grace. I share in God's own life. I'm conversing with God. You never converse with God that you don't share God. What does prayer do? It pours living water into your heart. Why? Because I am conversing with the Holy One.
Welcome back to Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live. We've got a free ebook we want to give you. It's about the Inquisition and the Crusades. These are sticking points for many people when they think about the life of the Catholic Church. Many Catholic people not sure what to make of this whole Inquisition and Crusades thing. If you'd like to get the real story of the Inquisition and the Crusades, it's available now at shop.catholic.com for free as an ebook. The real story, actually, it's this in this order. The real story of the Crusades and the Inquisition at shop.catholic.com. Our guest this hour, Mark Brumley. He's the president of Ignatius Press. I don't know if they've got any free ebooks for you. That might just be a thing we do. I don't want to put Mark on the spot, but we give away free ebooks. Mark?
We do too sometimes. People are invited to go to ignatius.com and check out our ebooks. That's Ignatius, IGNATIUS.com.
Yes.
How's that?
That's beautiful. Well done. Named after a saint.
After a saint. That's right. And you guys are named after a saint too, right? Saint Catholic?
Saint Catholic, yes, we are. Saint the beloved Saint Catholic. That's what we.
Hey, man, you got to give props to Carl Keating for securing Catholic.com.
Are you
what
kidding
a brilliant
move
on that part.
It is a brilliant move. Yeah, and it's so funny to hear. It's so funny to hear you or Patrick Madrid or some of the guys talk about how nobody knew what he was doing. I'm going to get this internet address. Like, okay, great, get it.
Sure. Hey, whatever. Knock yourself out, Carl. Go get all the .coms you want, man.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there were the dime a dozen in those days. Robert in Tallahassee, Florida, watching on YouTube Live. You are next, Robert. Go ahead with your question for Mark Brumley.
Oh wow! Hey.
Hey.
So my question is, as someone who's struggling with their faith right now, especially pertaining to the resurrection, what's the most comprehensive set of books and like different resources that I can access that can help really like bolster my faith and be able to defend it well?
Well, with respect to the specific issue of the resurrection, I recommend a book by Carl Olson. Carl is the editor of Catholic World Report, and the book is called "Did Jesus Really Rise from the Dead?" So I think that's an important book on the subject of the resurrection. With respect to the historical background of Jesus, I mean, I mentioned that Jesus of Nazareth book by Michael Hesseman, Hesseman. There's also The Case for Jesus by Brant Petrie. Catholic Answers, you guys have a book. What's it called?
It's funny because I was just thinking I was going to send him Why You Can Trust the Gospels, but that's a
Why
DVD.
You Can Trust.
But I don't think that's a book, though.
That's the DVD.
It's a
No,
DVD,
it's a DVD.
From Jimmy
It's
Akin.
a video.
Yeah.
Right. But you guys, I think you guys have, or at least you distribute
on the resurrection. Why are we drawing a blank, Darren? Catholic Answers book on the resurrection. Do we have it? We're using that part of our brain that's called typing into the computer and searting right now.
That's right,
Robert.
Well,
Why You Can Trust the Gospels, Jimmy Akin's book, a DVD set. I'll send that to Robert.
Right. But I of course knew the Ignatius Press book. Did Jesus Really Rise from the Dead? I was able to boot that one up.
Yeah, and Carl Olson, you can do worse than Carl Olson and Brant Petrie, that's for sure.
Yeah. But Brant Petrie's book on Jesus is a great book because it covers a lot of the historical facts, but it's written in a very accessible style, and so I highly recommend that.
Robert, you want to hang on the line and we'll get your address and we'll send you a copy of Jimmy's DVD set, Why You Can Trust the Gospels?
Oh, 100%.
All right.
Then, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Now, to make it 100%, I have to go slowly now. I got to put Robert on hold so I don't hang up on him when I go to Justin it says Idaho, Nampa, Idaho, listening on the new and improved Catholic Answers Live app. Justin, is that correct? Are you in Nampa, Idaho?
Yes.
All right. Very good. We never know, but there it is, Nampa, Idaho. Go ahead with your question for Mark.
So I'm a former Jehovah's Witness, and I'm a truck driver by trade, so I go to Mass when I can. But I know that the Jehovah's Witnesses have had lots of legal issues with child molesters and sexual abuse, and they've not been very forthcoming. And I know the Catholic Church has had trouble in the past. So if someone's investigating the church like myself, how would you get peace of mind that things are going in the right direction.
Okay, thanks, Justin.
Well, I mean, I think that we have to keep ourselves informed to see what church leadership is doing, and I think over the last 20 years we've seen huge reforms in the church. Even holding cardinals in the Catholic Church responsible. We know, the Cardinal McCarrick story. There's a lot of evil that he was able to get by with for any number of years, but in the end, he was exposed and he was held accountable and was not only removed from the College of Cardinals, but was actually removed from the clerical state. And so I think things like that, we need to be aware of those things because they give us confidence that this is an issue that's being addressed. But, it isn't just about what the leaders do. We certainly need, that's important. And ultimately, they have a responsibility before God and before the faithful to take care of these things. But all of us have a responsibility. So we need to be praying for our leaders and for our priests. And we need to be witnessing respectfully but firmly holding them accountable in the public sphere to remain faithful to what Christ asked of the church when it comes to these sexual scandals and sexual misconduct. So there's no easy formula. It requires prayerful diligence and support for leaders when they do the right thing, respectful criticism when they don't do the right thing, and just continue to hold ourselves accountable as individuals and hold the leadership of the church accountable. This is not, it's terrible what's happened in the last 40 years, but in the history of God's people, whether we're talking about the New Testament and the church, or we're talking about before that, the Old Testament people of God, the covenant people of Israel, we've had scandals and sin exist in the church. So in that sense, it's not new. But the fact that it's not new doesn't mean it's acceptable. So we have to not allow ourselves to be scandalized in the sense of losing faith or losing hope or losing charity because of these things. But on the other hand, not to just accept them all. Well, that's just the way human beings are. No, this is unacceptable, and we need to call people to the standard of the gospel. So that's what I would say.
What do you think, Jason?
Question?
Excuse me, Justin. Go ahead.
Sure.
So if there's a concern or misconduct in your local parish that you go to,
yes,
what would you recommend? I'm hoping it doesn't happen, of course.
Right. I would recommend going to the diocese, to the bishop of the diocese. And I will have to say, although in the past, 20 years ago and before, many bishops did not handle allegations of sexual misconduct by their clergy well or appropriately. As far as I've been able to see, and I've looked at it very closely over the last 20 years, in general, the church leadership, bishops have improved immensely. So I think if you were to see something or become aware of something that's going on in your parish, I think you should take it directly to the bishop of the diocese. And they usually have groups, organizations, and individuals whose responsibility it is to investigate these things.
Okay.
All right.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Justin. God bless you out there on the road as you're driving the truck, and maybe we'll get to talk with you again sometime. It's Open Forum with Mark Brumley, our guest. Open Forum means you can ask any question you'd like about the Catholic faith. And I didn't say this yet, and I should have. You don't have to be Catholic to call. You don't have to be Christian to call. We're happy to talk about the Christian faith, about Jesus, about the Bible, the sacraments, the Pope. Whatever you want, whether you're Catholic or Christian or not, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. We're going now to Lee in Colorado, listening to EWTN on Channel 130, Sirius XM Satellite Radio. Lee, go ahead with your question for Mark Brumley.
Thank you for taking my call.
Happy to.
I know in the Bible, many places of antiquity, wherever the Bible has said that there were cities that obviously were not there anymore, when they actually dug, they actually found archaeologically that the Bible was like fail safe as far as locating those things. My question is, but there's structures like the Sphinx, and a recent archaeological find over in Turkey, the Göbekli Tepe. It's an old, supposedly a temple complex with massive stones and things that they carbon dated back to at least 10,000 years ago. And my question is some of this stuff that we see, is this pre-Antediluvian remains?
Yeah, right. Okay, so
are we looking?
Well, you can probably hear the music, Lee, so we're going to have to get you an answer on the other side of the break. But does some of this stuff predate the flood? We'll find out from Mark Brumley when we come back right after this.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Bishop Joseph Strickland of Tyler, Texas, is one of the most courageous leaders in the church, known for his outspoken support of unborn life, Orthodox faith and morals, and reforming Catholic institutions. In his groundbreaking new book, Light and Leaven, he offers a forthright perspective on the state of the church today and calls on the lay faithful to meet its challenges boldly. Touching on topics including parish renewal, the centrality of the Eucharist, the need for prayer and silence in a noisy and distracted age, and the battle between good and evil in the church and world, Bishop Strickland's wise insights and evident love for souls will inspire and edify you. To order your copy of Light and Leaven, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Tomorrow on More to Life, decluttering.
Is your life cluttered up with problems you're tired of dealing with? We're going to help you clean house.
That's tomorrow on More to Life. Now back to Catholic Answers Live.
Groovy music there from Mark Brumley. A little bit of the old groovy music from Mark Brumley. It's open forum. Mark is the president of Ignatius Press, here to answer your questions about the Catholic faith. If you got a question about the Catholic faith, 888-318-7884. Before we went to the break, Mark, Lee in Colorado was asking about, there are very, very ancient religious structures, temples, and he mentioned the Sphinx, but you could go all around the world and find very, very ancient things that far predate the Bible. So Lee's question was, is this stuff surviving from before the flood?
Since we don't know when the flood was exactly, it's very difficult to say. So I would be inclined to say no, that these things are all within relatively speaking, recent history, and that the flood is this very, very ancient phenomenon or event.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
What do you think, Lee?
But we don't know.
Yeah, I guess it's all speculation. I guess one day we'll find out. Could I ask one more really quick question?
I hope you will, because I love the archaeology angle, and I want you to, go ahead. Give us another good one.
Have you ever heard of a manuscript that was written by Pontius Pilate to I think Tiberius, called Acta Pilate, and in this, this was it was a report that he wrote to Tiberius about his experience with what happened in Jerusalem with Jesus. And it was it's a fascinating report because it's probably like 10, 12 pages long. And in it, he actually mentions that he had Jesus called and had him brought into the praetorium pre-Passover week to talk with him and to try to tell him that, I believe in what you're doing, whatever, I don't know who you are.
I'll tell you what, Lee. Let's let Mark address whether he's heard of it first, and also if you could address its authenticity, Mark.
Yes, of course I've heard of it, and it's what we call an apocryphal work, which means it's a work that is not part of the biblical canon, and usually the word apocryphal has a connotation that it lacks not just authenticity in the sense of being part of the canon of the Bible, but is historically questionable or not reliable. Now, those are not the same things. Something can be apocryphal and be historically reliable, or be historically reliable, as most of ancient history, and not an apocryphal writing. Apocryphal here being associated with the Christian tradition or the Jewish tradition, scriptural books and things of that sort. So this document is generally not regarded as having historical reliability or being authentically written by Pilate to Tiberius, but rather is something that was written later on to reflect the Christian tradition or Christian ideas about Jesus.
Lee, thank you for both of those questions. And I thought we might be heading towards archaeology, because Lee started out with kind of a description of how modern archaeology has found quite a bit that is quite supportive of the Gospels and of the Exodus, for example, more and more evidence for some kind of Exodus, but he didn't go that direction. So I was all excited.
And of course we sometimes take for granted things that could very easily, as a function of history, have been lost to us, and then skeptical people would have said, well, the Bible says this, but where is that? Something as simple as the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Now, as it happens, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem survived the vicissitudes of history, but it might very well not have. And we might very well have had to deal with people who would have said things like, well, this is legendary.
Yeah.
We don't really have, we have ancient sources that speak of it, but, are those reliable? Or are they just reflecting, a legendary milieu or whatever? Some of the very things that are said now about certain events in the Bible or certain elements of the Bible that we don't necessarily have the same level, or in some instances we don't have any corroboration for, but other things we don't have the same level of corroboration for. Sometimes people will raise this as an objection, but we really shouldn't expect everything that happened in the biblical, in those portions of the Bible that are giving us history. Now, say that not everything in the Bible is intended to be a historical account. So we have to keep that in mind. We don't want to object to Jesus' telling the parable of the Good Samaritan on account of the fact that we haven't been able to identify somebody called the Good Samaritan, right? That's a parable, although for all we know, it may have been based on a historical person. We don't know. There are plenty of things in the Bible that things that are historical, and that there are there's historical evidence for, and there's historical corroboration for. But what we don't want to do is say, well, unless there's historical corroboration or verification of something, that we can't give it any historical credence.
Yeah.
So I'm an enthusiast about biblical archaeology and those things that point to and corroborate the historical elements of the Bible. I think those are great, but I'm a little bit I don't want to rely too much on that because I don't want to convey the idea that unless something can be historically verified, it's therefore up for grabs or we can question it. So of course the other extreme is to take a fideist position to say, well, it doesn't matter the Bible says it, I believe it, and that settles it.
Right.
Well, you need a little bit more, especially when you're trying to make an apologetical case for something. So
Yeah.
the truth is, as is often the case, it's somewhere in the middle. So.
Still, I find it really fun when they find things like Ezekiel's tunnel of Siloam and then
Right.
the pool of Siloam, because you have in the second book of Kings, Ezekiel dug this tunnel. It's lost for thousands of years, and then they find it, and right where
And
you
then
would
boom.
expect to look for it. And it dates to the right time. It dates to Hezekiah was
Hezekiah, right.
And then the pool of Siloam, Jesus healing the man in the pool of Siloam. It describes the porticos and everything. And then for 1,500 years, well, there's no pool with porticos. It doesn't exist. And then they dig it up, and there it is, right at the
there
end
it
of
is,
Hezekiah's tunnel. So I love when that stuff happens, because you do get the feeling of, I don't know, I don't have Christian Schadenfreude, but I'm willing to have Christian Schadenfreude.
Right. Well, so when you talk about Hezekiah's tunnel, like where he talks about that in the book of Hezekiah, right?
I'm pretty sure it's not in the book of Hezekiah. I've never seen that book, as a matter of fact.
When you said Ezekiel, I didn't want to say anything, but I was trying to find a segue and say, is that in the book of Hezekiah? As a little cue, but you corrected yourself.
Yeah.
So
No, but I mean, I'm sorry, but this is a very modern prejudice, but Hezekiah, Ezekiel, it starts to all sound the same after
They
a
all
while.
sound the same.
I
Nehemiah,
probably shouldn't have said that
Jeremiah.
out. I know, right? But it's sometime 1,000 years from now, people will be like John and Joe, and all those names sound alike to me. But
back in the day. All right.
back in the day. All right. Sorry about my Christian Schadenfreude. Let's go to our next caller. We're going to. I didn't say thank you to Lee. Lee, thank you very much for getting us off on archaeology and biblical archaeology. And call back again
On a
sometime.
tangent.
Monica is in Texas. She's listening on 89.7 FM. Monica, thanks so much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Mark Brumley.
Hi. My question is about indulgences. I received a card that had prayers on it, and they're very short prayers, but next to the prayer it has 500 days, 10 years, 3 years, 7 years, like different times, for each prayer that you say, I guess, of an indulgence that you receive.
Yep.
So my question is, who knows those days, and where did y'all get those from?
Well, I'm going to let Mark answer that, but first of all, do the 10 years one. I mean, all those other ones.
I do it all the time.
Yeah. I'd go for the 10 years. Well, 500 days. Well, just shoot, go right for the 10 years. But Mark, what do you make? What do you make of that?
Well, so these are kind of holdovers from an earlier time and they're not conveying time off in purgatory. What they're trying to convey is the notion that there were penances assigned, and those penances were assigned for a period of time. So as a way of expressing your sorrow for sin, So you might pray a prayer for 500 days. You might pray a prayer for 10 years. You might pray a prayer for a certain period of time. But we shouldn't think of purgatory as if it were simply earthly time extended into eternity. The idea of purgatory, when we talk about purgatory, we're talking about the purification of the heart of a person in relation to God, someone who is fundamentally in communion with God and God's friendship in the state of grace, as we say, but who has unrepentant venial sins or repented of mortal sins, but the person has not really adequately or completely repented in the sense of having wholly turned or transformed his life by God's grace away from that sin. So there's some attachment to sin, some undue attachment that remains after death, and so the person is in need of turning away from that, and there's a purgation. When we turn away from that to which we are inordinately attached towards the one to whom we should be completely attached, God, there's a death to self and a kind of suffering that turning away involves. And because that suffering that's involved in that turning away from some attachment that we still have towards God, there's a suffering involved, but it's not eternal. It's for a time, and therefore we say it's temporal. We call it a kind of temporal consequence or a temporal punishment due to sin. And so those penances were, when you're given a certain penance for a time, the idea was, well, you are undergoing this penance for a period of time in this world in order to prevent or minimize or reduce the amount of time or temporal punishment due in purgatory. But we want to underscore that this is describing a reality. There is a reality of purgatory. There is a purgation that happens. And that purgation can be mitigated by things that we do in this life by God's grace. But we're using a lot of figurative language or picture talk language to express those ideas. And so the time off in purgatory or the years of penance associated with a certain time off in purgatory, that's a figurative way of conveying the reality that we need to undergo, that if we leave this world with unrepentant venial sin and not adequately repented of mortal sin, but we leave in the state of grace, that we will need to be purified in order to wholly and completely, purely be in full communion with God in the life of heaven.
How's that for you, Monica?
That was good.
Okay, good.
All right,
good.
Very
Apparently
good.
you're funny as well, Monica.
Yeah, it was funny, wasn't it?
All right, we got to take a break. Monica, thanks for the call. We'll be right back
All
with
right.
more Open Forum with Mark Brumley right after this.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Go forth and preach the good news. It's not just a suggestion. If you want to take more seriously the command of Jesus to share the gospel with those around you, consider joining St. Paul Street Evangelization. It's a grassroots organization that brings the Catholic faith to the streets in a non-confrontational way. Visit our website, www.streetevangelization.com, to learn more. And don't forget to like us on Facebook. It's time to do our part.
I'm Roy Brown, Executive Director for Billings Catholic Radio. Catholic radio is arguably the greatest tool for evangelization. Radio has the power to speak directly to individuals and creates a sense of one-on-one fellowship. There is no better way to evangelize than through a relationship where we can share and bring the love and joy of Christ to another's daily life.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Here at Catholic Answers, we do apologetics. And I don't mention this enough, but there is a book called The 7 Deadly Sins of Apologetics that will help you avoid the most serious mistakes that budding apologists make. And I often introduce him as the president of the Alpha Quadrant's most important publishing house, Ignatius Press. But he's also the author of 7 Deadly Sins of Apologetics, our guest this hour, Mark Brumley. Sorry that I have neglected to mention that. I now suddenly am of the opinion that people's books should be mentioned a lot.
Why is that, I wonder?
I've developed that feeling about things. I don't know. Like if someone's got a book, doggone it, mention it all the time.
Just can't mention it enough.
Can't mention your. All right, let's go to John in Portland, Oregon, listening on Mater Dei Radio. The I don't know, how do I say this? The matriarch of Catholic radio stations in the United States, one of the oldest and most important. John, go ahead with your question.
My question is about books that might be available through Mark's company for preparing children for First Eucharist. I have a goddaughter, and with the COVID pandemic and all that, and people's lives being broken up, there's highly unlikely that she's going to be joining a group of children at one of the churches for a First Eucharist celebration.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what we're looking for is...
Well, has she read Ratzinger's Introduction to Christianity, first of all? I'm sorry, I'm only kidding, John, because that's a really hard book. What do you got for him, Mark?
Well, as you mentioned Ratzinger, pardon me? What'd you say, John?
She couldn't even pronounce the word Ratzinger. Let alone read it.
How about Benedict? Can she say Benedict? Well, you mentioned him. We actually have a book that... Say that again, please.
I said she might associate that with eggs.
Oh, eggs, Benedict. We actually have a book by... No problem. You mentioned Ratzinger. Benedict XVI did a book called Friendship with Jesus, which is he talks to children about Holy Communion. And then his successor, Pope Francis, we have a book by him called Your First Holy Communion, Meet Jesus, Your True Joy. So those are children's books. Obviously they've been adapted from things that the popes have written. It's not like the popes sat down and wrote these books out themselves, but they have wonderful illustrations, and they convey the teaching of the Church on the Eucharist. We also have a book called My First Holy Communion. So I highly recommend that, and that's by Deidre Mary Askoff. People can get these books at Ignatius.com or their local Catholic bookstore. We always encourage you to go there first. I know that's a challenge sometimes for people in COVID tide, but as we're coming out of COVID tide, check out your local Catholic bookstore first. And then another thing I would recommend, in association with First Holy Communion, children usually get the first confessions, and we have a book called Little Book About Confession for Children. So want you to check those out as well. And those things you can get, as I say, at your local Catholic bookstore. You can check them out at Ignatius.com.
Okay, John?
Okay, I'm on your site right now, and there appears to be a set called Sacramental Prep for First Communion.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Does this guy work for you, John? Do you currently work for Ignatius Press? Are you?
No, but I'm a member of St. Ignatius Parish here in Portland.
All right.
Oh, well, good. Glad to hear that.
Get my foot in the door?
Yeah, that's right. You're not a shill, in other words. You're not a plant.
No.
No, but I think it's beautiful. You're a godfather, and you're concerned about your goddaughter, and God bless you for that. That's magnificent. So what about that set, sacramental preparation?
I think those are good resources. I would highly encourage you to check those out. You might also check out some of the video resources that are available, especially on digital platforms like Formed. Formed.org has wonderful video resources for children in relation to sacramental prep. So
thanks, John.
All those things.
Thank you very, very much. Because we're getting near the end, I'm going to keep moving, and I want to go to Sven in Florida, listening to EWTN Channel 130, Sirius XM Satellite Radio. Sven, thanks for calling. You got a question for Mark? Sven?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for taking my call. Yes, hi, hello. I appreciate your program. I really enjoy your program. Thanks for taking my call. My question to you is about recently. Hello?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Sven.
Yes.
We're listening.
We're here.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Is recently and I actually really appreciate that. I noticed that there's been a lot of teaching lately about Satan and the power of Satan. And I think that's a lot of times something that we're a little bit reluctant to think about, or, we sort of brush it off a lot of times. And I had one of these moments when I was reading the scripture, and I read the same thing 1,000 times, and just something just hit me like a ton of bricks when I was reading about Christ when he was in his fasting in the desert for 40 days. And when he spoke to Satan and when Satan spoke to him and he responded back. And, like I said, I read the same thing 1,000 times, and then I just went into real deep thought about this because he said to Christ, he said, he took him to a high place and showed him, the kingdoms of the world and so forth, and said, I can give you all these things if you will only bow down and worship me.
Right.
And then the response that Christ gave was, you will, that away from me, Satan, that you will only worship, it is written, you worship only the Lord your God and him only.
Right. So Sven, I'm really getting anxious that we're going to hit the end of the show. So do you want to just put it in the form of a question for Mark?
Yeah. Sure, I will. Well, I think that Satan has a sort of a territorial dominion in this world that we just a lot of times just don't think about. And I think that's why Christ didn't say, that's not true, Satan, that God possesses all things, and that is a lie, and you are not, you have no authority or you have no dominion over these things, because all things are created by my Father in heaven, who is...
Well, okay, so let me get Mark to just comment on it, and I'll come back to you if we have time, Sven. But the fact that Jesus doesn't say to Satan, you can't give me the world, he says, he answers differently. Does that suggest the dominion that Satan has in this world?
Yeah, and of course, in the context here, the world, by the world, we don't just mean the created order. It's not like Satan is in charge of the created order. Specifically, it's talking about the kingdoms of this world. In other words, and it's not talking about the geographical regions. It's talking about the minds and hearts of people in the governing power of the world. And oftentimes, those folks, not limiting things to those folks, but those folks are concerned with what? Power and control and money and privilege, and they often engage in injustice and exploitation and things of that sort. And in that way, they're under the dominion of the devil. They're under the power of Satan. So it is true there's a real sort of spiritual dominion that people can be under when it comes to the devil. Ultimately, though, God is in charge. God has authority over the whole of creation. He allows Satan to be able to do certain things because God has allowed freedom, a certain amount of freedom, and he wants to bring about good out of allowing even the abuse of freedom by the devil and the abuse of freedom by human beings. And he's able to do that. But we should never think that because the devil has real power in the world and he controls his influence over people's minds and hearts, and he can have influence over us if we let him, that somehow that puts him on par with God. You often see this idea that you've got God on the one hand, you've got Satan on the other, and it almost looks like we have equal but opposite power. We have God on the side of good and Satan on the side of evil, but they're not equal. They are opposites, but they're not equal. I think C.S. Lewis made the point that if there's a opposite parallel to Satan, it's St. Michael the Archangel. It's not God. God is all-powerful, and he is in no way is Satan even in his league. So to the extent that he's in a league, he's in the same league as Michael the Archangel, that they're angelic beings with finite power, finite abilities, and so on. And God ultimately is, although through Jesus' death and resurrection he has triumphed over the devil, God is going to ultimately ratify that at the end of history. So we don't need to be afraid of the devil.
Sven, thank you very much. And St. Michael the Archangel, he does protect us in battle and
he does
from the wickedness and snares of the devil.
Yep. And may God rebuke him.
We humbly pray.
That's right.
Mark Bromley is the president of Ignatius Press, the author of 7 Deadly Sins of Apologetics, and just a great guy to get to spend a Thursday afternoon with. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Likewise. God bless you.
I hope we get to do it 1 million more times together.
At least.
Tomorrow, guess what we're going to do? We're going to just hit you with a bonus of 2 more hours of open forum because it's just gone so well. So we got Jimmy Akin coming back, He's going to do 2 hours of open forum. Ask him anything you want when we come back, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.